In this video, we'll study about the concept of budget deficit and the various related concepts of budget deficit. Now, first of all, what does budget deficit mean? Budget deficit refers to a situation for the government when the expenditure of the government is greater than revenue of the government. For example, if the expenditure of the government in a financial year is 100 crores and the revenue of the government is only 80 crore, so this is a situation of budget deficit where expenditure is greater than receipts. So budget deficit is the situation for a government when the expenditure incurred by the government in a financial year is greater than the receipts or the revenue earned by the government in the financial year. Budget deficit is of three types. First one is the RD, which is known as revenue deficit. Second is fiscal deficit. And the third one is primary deficit. For the conceptual clarity, first we'll study about what is the budget expenditure and what is budget receipts. So first we'll see what is budget expenditure. Budget expenditure is of two types: capital expenditure or revenue expenditure. First of all, I'll give you two examples such as construction of road by the government and welfare scheme by the government. If the government constructs a road, then the assets of the government are increased, and if government starts a welfare scheme, there is no increase in the assets. This is the main difference between the capital expenditure and revenue expenditure. In capital expenditure, there is the creation of assets. Assets are increased or reduction in liability. But in revenue expenditure, there is no creation of asset, neither the reduction in liability takes place. Then comes budget receipts. Budget receipts is of two types: capital receipts and revenue receipts. Now again I'll give you two examples. For example, fines, or what we call is challan, and capital receipt is such as disinvestment. What is the difference between this expenditure? Government is receiving money from disinvestment and government is receiving money from fines, but in this capital receipts there is a reduction in the assets, and in this there is no reduction in assets. This is the main difference between capital receipts and revenue receipts. Now we'll discuss about the types of budget deficit. First one is fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit actually indicates the borrowings of the government. If we go by the formula, fiscal deficit is budget expenditure minus budget receipts other than borrowings. If we calculate this, for example, if we are given the government has incurred an expense of 100 crore and it is only received or earned 80 crore, therefore the fiscal deficit would be 100 crore minus 80 crore, that is 20 crore. That is, the expenditure excess of 20 crore is done by the government by borrowing the money. This is the concept of fiscal deficit. The second one is primary deficit. Primary deficit is the actual borrowing of the government without interest payments. If we'll go by the formula of primary deficit is fiscal deficit minus interest payment. For example, if government takes a loan of 10 crore at 10% per annum, therefore, if we calculate the primary deficit, it would be 10 crore. But if we calculate the fiscal deficit, it would be 10 crore plus the interest, that is 1 crore for the annum, that is 11 crore. This is the major difference between primary deficit and fiscal deficit. The difference is of just interest payment, which is included in primary deficit, which is included in fiscal deficit but not in primary deficit. The third one is revenue deficit. Revenue deficit is nothing but when the revenue expenditure of the government is more than the revenue receipts. For example, what is revenue expenditure? I have already told you, as there is no asset creation and no reduction in the liability, and revenue receipts which do not increase the liability of the government and which do not decrease the assets of the government. There is no change in asset and liability status. The fiscal deficit of interim budget was expected to be 5.9%, but it has increased to 6.4%. It means the loans of the government have risen.